If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People who practiced acts of the witchcraft, the occult, etc. What was the strangest, most unexplainable thing you saw? I was the victim of a bear walker. In First Nations culture, a bear walker is someone who uses our sacred medicines for bad and not good. They can make someone very sick. Only a medicine man may reverse it, and it often comes as a gamble for the bear walker. Once reversed, they will suffer more than the one they made sick. I was 20 years old and very healthy. One night, I had a dream I was in a field and was picking wild flowers. From each direction, a tornado was coming at me. I woke up in a fevered sweat. That began 2 months of sheer misery. My doctor kept saying that I had a UTI. She would give me antibiotics and it would subside for a while. I lost 40 pounds in the span of 2 months. By the end of it, I couldn't walk. Barely ate. Finally, my mom got tired of it. My sister bundled me up and we went to the hospital. Though an earlier ultrasound showed nothing, there was a huge growth on my ovary. A few days later I had surgery, and when the doctor came to visit me, he said he never seen anything like it. It was a yellow, almost concrete-like substance around my ovary. I got better, but my mother remained unconvinced and scheduled an appointment with a medicine man. We gave him tobacco and he smoked a pipe and sang a song. He said something along the lines of a woman seeing me at a powwow. She became interested in who I was because of my mother. She threw a piece of medicine in my path. I stepped on it and it went up the right leg. He asked me if I still felt it. I said yes. He took a bone, what kind I am not sure, placed it in the area and began to suck. Weird, I know. He started vomiting yellow. Vomiting yellow. Like the doctor said. He gave me medicines and rituals for my mom to do. I went home that night and slept for 13 hours. My sickness never returned. This happened a few years ago. I was on a dating site and matched with an attractive person. So, I started chatting. We made it to the plans tonight? Part of the conversation, and she told me she was going to play hide and seek with Fluffy. Pointing out the item in their second profile picture, a bloody rabbit mask. Okay, let's be weird. So, I played along until she mentioned that they would be playing in my basement. I thought, how in the hell? Wild guess probably. I lied and told her I didn't have a basement. Immediately, she texted, oh yeah? And I heard some 5 kakalief furfiats booming from the basement. I won't lie to you, Reddit, I about shit myself. Obviously, I blocked her and froze for an hour before I gathered the courage to check my completely enclosed from the outside basement. I didn't find anything, thankfully. I didn't have a smart device at all, and I didn't have any speakers that could have been hacked. I didn't even have wireless internet at the time. The basement was completely empty. I can't explain it in the slightest. When I was in high school, I had this sudden bout of nightmares and sleep paralysis. I wasn't going through a stressful time or anything, and I don't freak out easily. I grew up watching 80s and 90s horror films, and I normally sleep with total darkness and doors closed. These nightmares were super sudden and happened almost every night. It was constant sleep paralysis where my room was on fire, or there were bats thrashing around above me, or there was a figure hovering over my body and I couldn't breathe, the classic. Sometimes my speakers let out strange frequency type sounds even when it was switched off. Things would fall off my shelves, etc. My mom would always find me sleeping on the couch the next morning with the TV on because it was so crazy. Suddenly it all stopped, and when I told my mom, she admitted that she had sought advice from a priestess who engraved a blessing for me on a silver pendant and instructed my mom to place it in my room. She didn't want to tell me to see if it would work. I've never had such episodes since. I was about 13 and my grandma was a believer in spirits, witches, etc. Well, I had just pissed her off and she told me I was going to pay. That night I woke up at about 3 in the morning and I saw a little kid with a green shirt on in my room. He stared at me for about a minute and I couldn't look away. He then ran out of my room straight through the door laughing. About 30 minutes later another figure appeared in my room who looked about 15. He just stared at me and mumbled something, and no matter how hard I tried I couldn't talk, scream, or move, I could only look. He then vanished into seemingly thin air. The next night I woke up at about the same time and it sounded as if there were 50 people in my room screaming at me to kill myself, kill my family, and just a lot of negative thoughts in general. The next day I got anointed and it stopped. Later that day I had to see my grandma and I instantly started to get sick after I hugged her and she just sat there with a smirk on her face. I then got anointed again and it stopped. I still can't explain how she did it, but I still to this day am afraid to make my grandma mad. This is a pretty mundane story, but I feel it captures something of what real magic might be like. I used to work in an occult bookstore. We sold mostly psychic nonsense and spiritualist new agey stuff. But there was a bookcase in the back with the real expensive stuff. And the owner was this real old, real wise man. This woman used to come in when I was working and she'd just talk. For ages and ages. It was a non-stop stream of bullshit. She knew this, she did that, did you know about this, on and on. She'd suck up a ton of time. If you've ever heard the term energy vampire, it would apply here. When she left, you'd just feel drained. One day she comes in while the owner is there. She walks up to the counter and starts her shtick, and he's very polite and listening, but she just sort of runs out of steam. Like, within 60 seconds. She hums and haws a bit and then walks out of the store. It would usually take me an hour to get rid of her, and he shut her down in a minute flat, with a smile on his face. I mention it to him and he says, there's a circle of protection painted under the floor for a reason. My sister is really into occult Wiccan witchcraft kind of stuff. I think she meant to be Wiccan, but a 13-year-old isn't incredibly discerning. Around the time she got into it, our house started to get incredibly creepy. We would see things move out of the corner of our eyes. Nobody wanted to be home alone. Nobody wanted to be in the living room at night. At first, we could blame it on the house and the land. Then we moved, not just houses, but continents. The weird stuff followed. All of it was always centered around my sister and her room, and it was always aggravated when we did serious cleaning, and especially when we moved. The height of it was when we were moving back to the US. We had 2 different flight groups. My mom and sister left 6 weeks before the rest of us to pick the new house, while my dad, brother and I cleaned and packed at the old house. We heard thumping from my sister's room. The windows and doors would open and close on their own, not possible from just the wind, and shadows would move wildly under the door pretty much every night, even with the blinds closed. I'm not sensitive/discerning of that kind of stuff, but it was plain as day even to me. It was only my sister finally moved out of our next house and we cleaned out her room that it all ended. Whatever it was tied to my sister and any sort of disorder/uncleanliness. I rented a house a few years back and never believed in paranormal or any sort of spirits, etc. My first week in the house was fine, a few creaks here and there, but nothing major. I very soon started to feel like I was being watched, or just a presence in general. The third week I started waking up in the middle of the night with large scratches, almost cuts going the length of my arm. From my wrist to my armpit, 3 scratches all parallel. Always on my right arm. I didn't think much of it. One night I hear a loud bang, go to the back and notice my back door was open. Okay, no worries, I shut and locked the door with a deadbolt. Next morning I wake up and the door wide open, but the freaky part, the deadbolt is still in the locked position as well as the knob. It really starts to freak me out now. I start telling a person I work with about this stuff. He told me his sister was a Native American shaman priestess, whatever it was, and she would come sage bless my house if I wanted. The next week she came over with, I believe it was called sweet grass and sage. She burned the sage walking around and told me can definitely feel a presence in the house. She hung the sweet grass over my bed, and ever since I haven't had anything strange happen. Very strange. Both my husband and I have family members who have a little magic. 1. I was staying with my grandma so she could help me with the baby. I had a bad toothache, and waiting for my appointment. Up late with pain, trying to be quiet so I don't wake anyone. My 2-year-old calls for me. I bend over the playpen and she puts her tinny hand on my cheek and said, "Poor mama." That instant the pain was gone. 2. I was helping my cousin move into his first apartment. When I pulled into the parking lot, my daughter looked up from her dolls, said monsters live there. She spent the day talking to her friends from behind the curtain. I didn't tell my cousin about the monsters. He moved out after 20 days. 3. When I was 20 I had a detailed dream that I was talking to a little girl. "We have to save him, who?" I asked. She looks over the side of the raft and in the black oily water a baby boy is floating. I pick him up and hold him in my lap. The girl smiles and tells me, "I'm glad we picked you." 3 years later I have a daughter and a newborn son who look just like the kids in my dream. 4. When I was 13 my future sister-in-law spent the night. We were up late and noticed the corners of my room getting darker. It kept closing in and we got scared. We went down to the living room and sat close to each other. That is when we saw the large rotten fox walking on its hind legs outside the picture window. It looked at us for a long time before it walked away. I have a lot more. Safe to say I believe in the possibility of a world just outside of notice. My grandmother grew up in post-World War II Nagasaki. Her family actually saw the bomb drop from their house in the mountains outside of the city. There was some mysticism stuff that was passed down in her family, some of it was fortune telling. By the time it made it to my grandmother's generation, they just started using a deck of 52-54 with jokers, playing cards. Before that they used different types of cards or sticks that were like dice, something like that. She also did some readings of palms and the birthmarks that Asian babies have when they are first born. Anyway, she would always say that the mysticism stuff was fake and only for entertainment purposes, that it was bullshit and that it was a mix of cold reading and random coincidences with the cards. She would only do readings if you agreed it was only for fun. What was really weird was how accurate her readings were despite her saying giving her disclaimer. My mom had an acquaintance that heard about this and asked to have a reading. My grandmother gave her little speech and then starts with the card drawing. After a few minutes and looks up suddenly and says, "So I guess you want me to talk about your cheating husband and what you are going to do about it, about how it is going to affect your daughter." The lady nearly fell out of her chair with shock. My grandmother had only just met this lady and my mother never mentioned her before. My mom didn't even know that this woman had a kid. The woman confirmed all that and was taken aback about it. My grandmother gave her whole speech again, entertainment only, yada yada. Went on telling her more details. The person the husband was cheating on her was someone the woman knew. The daughter would be fine. She predicted the sex of the next baby based on the birthmark of the older sibling on all my cousins. Asian babies have right above their butt when they are born, it goes away when they get older. She was always correct for 20 plus guesses. It's much debate on some of the other cousins if she actually predicted it. She claims she couldn't remember every time she did it, but that too was for entertainment. The only time she didn't get it exactly right was because she said she couldn't tell because the birthmark was too faded, but it looked like both boy and girl. The cousin had twins, a boy and a girl. She said that this didn't count cause it didn't look like twins. Someone in my family calculated the odds of her being right so many times and it was really high, even with a 50% of going either way. A few times she has described things that happened in other people's dreams. I once visited her and she asked why I kept dreaming about my teeth falling out of my mouth and why was it reoccurring. I didn't tell anyone about that. She just kinda smiled and told me not to worry about that and just to take care of my teeth. She would read palms and tell people about their luck, lifelines and how many kids they would have. Once she was really sad and the lady asked why. Again with this only entertainment, but she saw that the lady would have 5 children, but 2 miscarriages. She even saw the order that it happened in and the woman did have 5 kids with the miscarriages in the order my grandma saw. Some of the time, my grandmother would make predictions or say that she couldn't read the fortune, or that it was too uncertain. But the time she has gotten it right has been really accurate. If you ask her how or why, she still just says it's for entertainment and is just nonsense and random. She wanted to teach my mom and sister, but my mom is a hardcore Christian and doesn't want to learn. Apparently my grandmother only wants to teach the females in the family. I am really sad to say that this weird, usual, just for entertainment thing she does will die with her. I'm not a religious person and if anything only believe in doing good and honoring whatever positive energy there is. What happened to me still makes me feel like surely someone was pranking me. I'm not even sure how to share this story, it still freaks me out. I want to as a logical person believe there's no God, or at the very least no such thing as evil spirits and this has always shaken me enough to question it. I've only ever told this story to my brother. When I was in high school I dated a guy who to be frank was always an asshole, but towards the end of our relationship started worshipping Satan. One night while on the phone, this was before cell phones, he said he sent something to pay me a visit that night. Not taking him seriously at all, I laughed like, yeah okay, whatever. We hung up the phone, I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, while asleep, I started feeling the worst stomach cramps I've ever had. Tossing and turning, waking up and trying to go back to sleep, it would not go away unless I opened my eyes and sat up. I settled, trying to sleep, and there was a whisper, it sounded like a man's voice, "Hey." It was right in my ear. I opened my eyes, looked around nothing. Closed my eyes again, drifted off, and again felt cramping to the point of sickness in my stomach as another whisper sounded, "Wake up." I sat up, the sick feeling stopped. At this point I'm fully freaked out. The whispers sounded like someone hovering over me. I pulled the covers over my head and just tried to lay still and pretend I didn't exist and that shit didn't just happen. Minutes went by and I thought everything was fine, then suddenly tapping started in my room, like someone was walking though and smacking things randomly. I'm not even ashamed to admit that I bolted from my bed, and ripped my bedroom door open and ran out. I spent 5 to 6 years immersed in our local Santeria, Cuban cousin of voodoo, and saw many things that seemed more than coincidental. I'll try to tell this story without using a lot of tradition-specific jargon, but if anyone has questions about the veracity of this story, they can DM me. There was a young man who had also been spending time with the local community and had taken on this quirky role of low-key troublemaker and little lost sheep. That lasted right up until he stole a car and cash from one of the highest ranking priests. He disappeared after that, but eventually we heard that he'd made his way to an Ila in another city and had requested to be initiated into the priesthood. In Santeria, becoming a priest is not inexpensive. You pay thousands and thousands of dollars, 5 figures is not uncommon, to purchase the required supplies and food, and to fly other priests in from all around the country to assist with the week-long ceremonies. At the end of this process, you are given an exhaustive divination reading that's meant to serve as a kind of map and manual for the rest of your life. It's a huge deal. And it happens after you've spent all the time and money and people have taken time off from their jobs and lives to make this happen for you. Well, this guy goes through the whole process. Tons of money and a week of ceremonies. He sits down with the elder priest who will be doing his reading. The divination begins. The priest looks at him and says, "The gods don't want you. Get up and leave." Ice. Cold. When I was a young kid, me and my friends were big into ghosts, the paranormal, the occult, or anything else creepy. I was a self-identifying witch and we would often go ghost hunting in local places. We even came up with a theory that our school used to be an ancient, cursed burial ground. The thing we loved most was Ouija boards, which is where this story begins. One day, my friend comes up to me and tells me about an experience he had. He had made a makeshift Ouija board and used it on his school bus. He had contacted a ghost that called itself and it was trying to warn us about something. Me and my other friend were curious, and wanted to know more. I had recently gotten an actual Ouija board for Christmas, and I suggested that we should have a proper session at my house. So we all come over one day and set things up, salt circle, candles, and lavender as a substitute for sage. We start the session, and things go wrong immediately. The board is saying weird and cryptic things, so we ask its name. The ghost goes by T. We ask what it is, and it just says proxy. A quick Google search of the word made us realize that T was a proxy for something a lot darker. Us being kids, we thought it was the Ouija board demon whose name started with a Z, but now I'm a little unsure exactly what it was proxying for. Suddenly, we heard a loud noise coming from the closet. My friends went over to look, and I stayed back to not take my fingers off the planchette and accidentally end the session without saying goodbye. They both screamed and ran out. They both claimed they saw a long, black shadow thing with tiny white eyes, curled up in the fetal position on the closet floor. We all freak out and end the session right there. I knew we had holy water in the other room, so we went to go get it. While we do, we hear another noise. We rushed back, and found that the planchette, which we had taken off the board, was back on the board by itself, and all our other items were scattered around the board. We blessed the board right then and there. We talked to our ghosts a few more times, both T and A. We figured out that A comes in darkness and T comes in light, so if we wanted to talk to one or the other, we'd just turn the lights on and off. But here's the freaky part, T told my friends that he wanted to drain them of their essence, and that he was connected to their families. A told us that he was also connected, but was there to protect them. We saw the black shadow figure a few more times, most often outside our windows, watching from the street. We thought it was T. We also saw a white figure with black eyes a few times, which we thought was A. I also could not go into the basement closet without getting a terrible sense of dread. Eventually, we get the house smudged and the sighting stopped completely. Now, I'm a proper Wiccan and have resolved to myself to never use a Ouija board again. The last apartment I lived in was me and 3 friends living together. The first 8 months in the apartment everything was normal. Then there was one week where weird shit started to happen. All of us got this really bad cold at the same time. The sickness would cause me to wake up every morning with such bad vertigo that I would throw up. Items in the apartment would go missing and turn up in a completely different part of the apartment. Like the TV remote would go missing and then someone would find it in a kitchen cupboard, and every time this happened no one remembered moving it / knew they wouldn't have moved X object into Y location. Our oven stopped working properly. And I would wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that there was a presence hovering over my bed watching me. I followed all of the advice that my superstitious friends gave me. I covered all the mirrors in my room before going to bed, and I woke up one night and felt the presence of the ghost in my room and yelled at her to leave me alone. Anyway, after about 2 weeks of all of us feeling like we were losing our minds, roommate number 3 ended telling the new guy she was dating about the weird supernatural stuff. Guy took it very seriously, and then went to confront his ex-GF. It turns out his ex-GF was a Wiccan, and one of the Wiccans who doesn't have a problem doing black magic, I guess, and she was super jealous that this guy was dating someone new. So the ex-GF had put a curse on roommate number 3, and that's why our apartment had become haunted. I guess the guy said something to convince his ex that the way she was reacting was not fair, and got her to lift the curse, and our apartment immediately went back to normal. I used to work as a counselor at a Pentecostal summer camp while I was in school for a degree in theology. The last summer I worked at the camp, we were doing a bed check and making sure no one was out of their room when I saw a light and heard a lot of shouting. I walked over to the door expecting to bust some kids for trying to sneak out, but instead I saw a kid writhing on the ground. The kid on the ground was this random kid from a random church who just dropped him off at the camp. His youth pastor didn't even stay, which is not common at all. He was maybe 16 and had a cosmological tattoo that looked vaguely occultish. Apparently right before I showed up, the kids had started to read the Bible out loud together, and this kid just started growling and laughing. When I showed up, the kids had started praying for him and he dropped to the ground and started yelling. It wasn't a seizure or a spasm, it was contortion. A couple youth pastors came in and started praying over the kid, and it broke out into a full-on exorcism. The kid eventually started heaving and threw up, and everyone stopped. The kid started sobbing and said, "For 6 years it's followed me around. For 6 years it's been holding on to me. I was just a boy when it found me. I'm free. I'm free." I didn't stick around to ask what any of that meant. My theology didn't have a good basis for demons or possessions or exorcisms. I thought that all of that was hokey. But this kid was so genuine. No one touched him throughout the entire process. As far as I could tell, this was real, and it shook me to my core. I was and still am the only child in a family of 3, my mom, dad and me. My dad worked night shifts, so I was left alone mostly on my own devices in this large house we moved into, and BTW still live in. It is a duplex house, beautiful on the outside, but something terrified me about the 2 rooms in the upper floor and the basement. I was scared of sleeping alone in either of these rooms, and weird shit started to happen right off the bat. I would wake up in weird spots in the house, always on the floor somewhere cuddled up. Often I would find my bed shaking vigorously, and all I did was cry myself to sleep. No one would believe me no matter what I said. I always saw shadows lurking in the corner, sometimes hear strange sounds, and once saw a shadow figure bolting away in front of my window. It all stopped without explanation when I was about 15 to 16 years old, and I actually started to sleep in the upper floor room. I was terrified off, scratching everything off that happened as a wild imagination of a child, which I still was. Until one day when I went in the washroom of the room I slept in to take a shit, did the dirty work, washed my hands and about to head out, and the ducking light switches on. I must be going crazy, right? Imagining shit again? I laugh it off and switched the light off, and shitting bricks tried to walk away. The moment I was about to leave the room believing something bizarre happened, perfectly explainable by logic, the bathroom door slammed shut, like just to disapprove of what I was thinking. 23 years old now, living in the same house, no strange occurrences, and a bit on the heavy side for shadow people to carry me around while I sleep. I actively practice witchcraft, and honestly, the more you dive into the occult/spiritual practices, your line between strange and normal gets really blurry. However, some of my most interesting experiences occurred while doing energy readings for other people. The way I read is by focusing on a person and on their energy, and I will see a sort of vision from them. I've seen a naked woman being crowned by hands of shadow, with serpents sitting at her feet like guard dogs. I've seen an extremely detailed/intricate dagger on a pedestal in an underground chamber, awaiting its next ritual. Most recently I saw a teenage boy on a tall metal structure, preparing to leap over the edge and fly. I've also done something referred to as diving, which is a deep meditation meant to explore your own energy system or soul. You see all kinds of bizarre things when you start exploring yourself so intimately. This was about 30 years ago. We were staying with my in-laws, parents, out in the country, 11 wooded acres with a spring-fed pond/swamp, while waiting for our place to be ready to move in. My so worked midnight shift and didn't drive after dark, so I was taking him to and from work. Normally I love going outside after dark, but that property always gave me the creeps and felt like I was being watched from the woods. One night, I accidentally locked myself out and was forced to sleep in the car. Sometime around 3 a.m. I was woke up out of a sound sleep. My heart was racing, hair standing on end, like you might if you woke from a nightmare, but I hadn't had one. Then I heard noises like something was dragging on the dirt/gravel drive and some light tapping on the car. Of course I'm already kinda freaked, but figure it's an animal. I looked out the windows but couldn't see anything. The noises continued for about an hour. I tried turning on the headlights and the noise would stop, still couldn't see anything out there. Turned the lights off and within a minute or so, noises again. Needless to say I didn't get much more sleep and left early to pick up So. I got to where he worked, restaurant, and just about ran inside to wait for him, still pretty creeped out. Then when his shift is over we head out to the car and find there are muddy handprints all over it, some with duckweed stuck on them. On the front and rear fenders, one back door, and all over the trunk lid. My so turned white as a sheet and asked about them, so I told him my story. He then told me about how when he and his older sibs, were kids, they camped out one night when the house was being built and something came into their camp and left duckweed and mud hand and footprints all over. He suggested waiting until it was fully light out to go home. He had the next 2 days off, so made some phone calls and found us somewhere else to stay for a few weeks. I've never been back there after dark. Years later, our daughter at about age 5 started crying whenever we talked about her staying overnight at Grandma's house and would refuse to go because of the monster in the swamp after she and Grandma had camped out on the back deck one summer night. In high school, I had a friend who had a bad home life and was renting a room out a guy's house who was scratched. He had a shed in the back of his house that he used to practice Santeria. So many stories to tell, but one of the freakiest was when I wanted to see inside of the shed. I grew up without a religious influence, so didn't believe in evil to that degree, so he asked it if I could and it said yes to him. I wasn't there, I'd cow he did it, etc. Once it gave me permission, I had to wear this skirt thing over my lady part that towed around my waist. BC I was a female to protect myself inside, he said. So I did. I walked in and say this statue in the corner, other stuff around like a desk with feathers and bones, etc. The statue had food under it, and I was there 2 weeks ago when he had made that meal, and the same plate he put that food on was under that statue. It was 2 weeks old and no mold or bugs had touched it, not even ants. It didn't even separate like the fats from the oils, etc. It gave me chills, and I asked why the food hadn't aged or been touched, and he said it was BC, it was the spirit's offering, so nothing messes with it after that. I never asked to go in again. But he said I wasn't allowed to whistle in the house, and he had this statue that would whistle out of nowhere, and I shit you not. I stopped going over and became a believer after that. There are a lot more crazy stuff that happened if you guys want to know. But if you get curious about that stuff, just be very, very careful. P's. Getting scratched means he did ritual in the Santeria religion and gave his soul. I don't want to misinform you or poorly articulate it, but that's what he explained it to me as. I practice witchcraft, as did my older brother, which is extremely relevant, and have a strict ritual schedule that follows the moon cycle. My brother unfortunately passed away suddenly almost 6 years ago, and I have made no attempt to contact him since his death, even though it's still hitting me pretty hard. Recently I got pretty sick, early January, and was in the hospital and missed 2 very important rituals. The night after the second ritual, I dreamt was sitting in a train car with my deceased brother, and we had a long conversation about where our family grimoire was now and what had happened to him. He walked me through several things that were important to our family craft, and I got to say goodbye to him properly and tell him I loved him. When I woke up, I was apparently hysterical and had to be calmed down by a close friend before I fell asleep again. It was very surreal, and I still remember every detail of the occurrence, and have not strayed from the rituals since. I'm agnostic, but always been into occult stuff and Satanism since I was a young teenager. I try to be very rational about things, but there have been a few times where I had no explanation and chalk it up to the unknown. About 2 years ago, while heavily depressed and reading a lot about occult figures like Eliphas Levi, I went out late at night to smoke a cigarette since I have horrible insomnia. I noticed a strange light in the woods. It's worth mentioning I live in the middle of nowhere. Well, anyways, at first I thought it was someone trespassing with a flashlight. But this single light transformed into 2, then back into 1 and back again in the most bizarre way. Very slow and methodical, not like 2 people would stumbling around with flashlights. Plus it didn't look like the beam of a flashlight, but instead as if all the light was being sucked into it in the shape of a ball. It was hovering and moved slightly up and down, side to side. It kept going from 2 to 1 and back again. It also was growing brighter and dimmer. I noticed that it kept gradually moving closer to the edge of the woods near me. I started to think someone or something was about to pop out of the woods. It kept doing this and moving closer and closer, and I just sat there paralyzed. As soon as it hit the edge of the woods, it vanished. I quickly ran back inside, unable to process the whole thing. Fast forward a couple nights later, I see the same light. But this time it was not moving, just growing brighter and dimmer. It did this for about 10 minutes, then, just like before, it vanished into thin air. I tried to come up with every possible explanation, like car headlights reflecting from a distance or something, but was never able to explain every aspect of their appearance. I only saw them those 2 times and never saw them since. They were both frightening and fascinating. I remember wondering if it was something truly paranormal or just my brain malfunctioning. It did increase my occult interest, but still am not anywhere near a believer. I only find religion interesting from a research perspective. My best guess was that it was just light reflecting from somewhere far off, but I've lived there quite a while before and since and never saw anything like it. The way it looked was so strange, and I've never seen light behave in that way any other time. I'm going to try and keep this as summarized, and slightly vague as it's a hard story to tell and should probably just make an alt but duck that, as possible. Bear with me as this gets my heart pumping to this day. A very close friend of mine who we'll refer to as A used to live in a very old house where strange things would happen. Lights turn on and off, books falling off shelves, etc. A's folks were out of town and they decided to throw a party. Everything was going well and we were all having a great time when someone decides to bring out a Ouija board. Now I grew up in a very religious environment, and while I am not religious myself, I'm aware that there are things we cannot control and refuse to go near that shit, so I left instantly as I was very outnumbered. I stayed. They started a session and things started changing. Doors were slamming in the house. It spelled out KILLME and everyone in the room except A yelled out "kill me." They all got a little freaked out and decided to carry on the night. Over the following 6 months, everyone in that room that spoke out the words aloud passed away, and A and I are the only ones left. When I was in high school, my grandfather died. After the funeral, some family members and I were clearing out his barbershop. As I'm collecting his magazines and other items, I knock loose a board and I see these vials behind it. Some with teeth and green and red liquids. I got uncomfortable but left it alone. Everyone was in the back gathering his porn films. BC, he had a side business of renting movies and porn, and yes, before you ask, I watched a few. But to the story. We found a safe, no one could open it, so we took a break to have a smoke. I stayed walking around the shop and saw the safe was now open. I looked inside, found a catalog of occult supplies and recipes, if you can call it that, and a strange coin that had naked man arms and legs spread out and holding a scale. My aunt came in, says to me, "Oh, you opened it?" I go, "No, thought one of you did." I left everything there because I had to go home. I get home and that coin is sitting on my bed. Then that night things got scary. At 3 a.m. all our phones ring and hang up in a pattern for 20 minutes and heard our dogs barking, yet everything was still and quit. It's windy everywhere else, and as I'm talking to my brother we stopped mid-sentence and looked at the back door. We heard the door handle jiggle and rattle, then heard a little girl laugh, but as soon as it was 4 a.m. everything stopped. I have no idea how that coin got to my house, and after that I never saw the coin again. Didn't see anything but heard. Me and my friends would smoke in this abandoned house we'd always go in, so we had a room upstairs that we mainly used because there was a staircase on the outside of the house that led upstairs for quick access. We'd put furniture we'd find around this house into that room, and one day we put 2 large mirrors we found in the house that were about 2 feet high and 6 to 8 feet long across 2 of the walls in our smoke room, so when we were in the room we always saw our reflection. One night my friend decides it's funny to play Bloody Mary after him and another friend smoked about 10 joints together. Room is completely baked and as high as a ducking satellite. I kept telling my friend, "Stop, don't ducking, do it." Each time he said Bloody Mary. Too late, he said it 3 times and broke one of the mirrors. Silence for the next minute until we all heard a door open and footsteps downstairs that were the slowest, creepiest footsteps I've heard in my life. We just sat there for a good 5 minutes in the dark silence with the footsteps underneath us, completely terrified. I whispered to my friends, "Let's get the duck out of here," through the door that leads to the outside staircase on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I've never dipped so fast in my life before or after. We actually continued to go back to that house afterwards for a good while too, but immediately got rid of the mirrors in the room and nothing like that ever happened again. I've always had classic sleep paralysis, but this is some advanced sleep paralysis, lol. I was asleep in bed when I was awakened by the end of my comforter floating in the air and something or someone floating above it. I was clutching the top of my comforter with my hands, trying to cover my face, trying to hide from whatever was there, but I couldn't pull it up. I'm positive my eyes were shut, but I could still see my entire room. Not my room in a dream, but my room as I left it when I went to sleep. I was definitely awake and able to see through my shut eyes. I kept trying to kick my comforter down with my feet but couldn't reach it, even though it was definitely within reach. And even though my comforter was blowing, I felt no wind. It felt like I couldn't look up high enough to see whatever being was haunting me, but I could see enough from my peripheral views that something was there. I kept trying to shake away the moment like waking yourself up from a dream, but it wasn't a dream and it felt different from normal sleep paralysis. I just stayed watching my comforter blow for a good minute or two before it stopped. When my comforter settled, the being left and my eyes were very clearly open. I was more convinced that it was just a vivid dream. Every look just as it had minus the floating comforter and being. I tugged the comforter over my head. Before I could relax, I felt someone standing next to my bed with their hand on my comforter, touching my arm, then moving to lift the comforter. I recognized it was not like the pressure of a sleep paralysis demon, it was legit something very real and physical there. Ask someone to touch your arm. Take in the feel of their touch and how you can feel their presence next to you. It was like that. I immediately understood it was serious because I definitely was not asleep. I was more certain now than before that I was completely awake, and I nearly screamed out loud when I jumped away and I felt it leave. I was in complete disbelief. Like, damn, that shit really was right there. That was the most intense sleep paralysis type thing I've ever felt. And I've heard a voice once. I've had something wrap its arms around me while I was laying on my side and the sun was out, but this shit? I'm looking over my shoulder typing this. Before, it just felt like phantoms passing by. That thing felt like it came to see me. The closest thing I had was more of a result. My friend's older brother got a Ouija board. Parents are Christian, so they didn't like it, got rid of it, etc. Now I wasn't there, but apparently it kept showing up, even with the brother insisting it was mostly a joke and he wasn't repeatedly digging it out of the trash. Cut to years later, and my friend and I are just out of high school and hanging out every day. I sleep over there multiple times a week, sometimes waking up, eating breakfast with them, working, pitching in on dinner, and then going to sleep later. They all say the house is haunted, and honestly, I don't buy into it. I'm religious but don't really think angry spirits are roaming the earth. Hauntings in particular don't really ring true to me, and most still don't, even after this. There are multiple times where I'm walking down the hall and jump because someone suddenly came out of a doorway next to me, except when I turn my head, they didn't, everyone's downstairs. It came to a head one night when my friend and I are alone. Any siblings have either moved out or are out of town. Her parents are gone and we're awake just talking and laughing, and from the corner of the room a deep male voice goes, "Lay down and shut up." Which we both did, immediately. Literally silent for a few minutes until she asked me if I'd heard it too, which I responded in the affirmative. We were both too scared to do anything for a while, but when we heard her parents come home I finally was able to fall asleep. She told me what the ghost's name was. The next day, that her brother said he was nice and that they all commonly saw him out of the corner of their eye and heard him periodically. Haven't been convinced by anything supernatural since, but I'll admit I'm a bit more open to it after that. My mom and I are both practitioners of witchcraft. I am a white witch while my mom is a dark witch, which means she deals with hexes, curses, etc. My mom has hexed people in the past that have hurt her or her family. She is not afraid of karma or the rule of three. One of the curses I saw was when I was a child. There was a man who worked with my stepfather who would constantly steal clients from him or would take credit for my stepfather's work. He actively tried to sabotage my stepfather's employment and my mother got fed up. She performed a hex on him and within days the guy had fallen from favor at work. All his clients were canceling appointments for varying reasons, his deals were falling through, his hair was thinning from stress, his family was going through economic hardships, etc. The guy's life completely did a 180 and to this day he hasn't fully recovered from it. He still struggles with making sales and is constantly getting on his employer's nerves. Another time, an old friend of mine and I had an awful falling out. Her betrayal really hurt me and I fell into depression for a long while. She tried turning friends against me and did everything she could to hurt me. My mother decided to return some of that negative energy her way and performed a hex. I didn't know it at the time, otherwise I would have told her not to, but she put a curse on her and her family. Well, within days everything went wrong. Her family fell into economic hardships and they lost the family car and almost lost their house. Her father had a stroke out of nowhere and with no family history of it, thankfully nothing serious, but was bedridden for days and couldn't work. Her schoolwork suffered, and her family had a period of real tough times. My mom didn't tell me what she had done until months later, at which point I was terrified of her. Magic isn't something to be done lightly, and hexes especially are dangerous things. I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole, but my mom actively practices them. I worry when karma comes to collect.